Listen-only mode.
Hi there, everyone. We are going to get started in a moment. So we're just going to give people one more minute to join, and then we will get started. Oop. Whoops. We'll go back. Sorry about that. We'll get started in just a minute. All right. We may have a few more folks joining us, but we'll get started. Today's webinar will be recorded, and we will share the recording link in the slides and a few other resources with you after. So just to get started today, here it is. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really happy that you're here. We're going to talk today about promoting healthy food choices. And we're going to focus on educational settings, hospitals, food pantries, and retail settings. And hopefully today's webinar content will be helpful to you where you work or for folks that you work with. So today's webinar is presented by us here at the Ecology Center, a Groundwork Center for Resilient Communities, and Taste the Local Difference. And we're all part of a project called Building Healthy Communities. Whoops, it's on autoplay. Sorry, guys. So we're all part of a project called Building Healthy Communities. And this project is a grant-funded project that's hosted at the Health Department of Northwest Michigan. And it was established to help provide support for participating sites, which is over 50 sites right now, to implement evidence-based healthy food policy and healthy food environmental changes. So today on the line, we're all going to introduce ourselves. Sorry about that. I'm on a pause autoplay. I am Lindsay Scalera talking to you right now, and I'm the Farm to Institution Campaign Director at the Ecology Center. And I also serve as a Healthcare Without Harm regional organizer and the co-lead of the Michigan Farm to Institution Network.
And also here at the Ecology Center, hello everyone. I'm Nikki Milgram, Sustainable Food Healthy Communities Director at the Ecology Center, as well as a Michigan regional organizer for Healthcare Without Harm's Healthy Food and Healthcare program. And both Lindsay and I have been working with the Building Healthy Communities project to support 8 or more healthcare or hospital institutions in implementing healthy food service guidelines and healthy food changes.
And I'm Megan McDermott. I'm at the Groundwork Center for Resilient Communities as a food and farming policy specialist, where I oversee our farm to school and food access programs. And my role in the Building Healthy Communities grant has been both as a consultant to advise on schools and food pantries, and also to directly coordinate with 8 sites, 4 pantries and 4 schools, which you'll hear more about in the webinar.
And I am Trisha Phelps of Taste the Local Difference. I'm the operations director there. And again, with Megan, providing a consulting role in the Building Healthy Communities project on marketing specifically, and also working with 11 sites ranging from hospitals and community mental health clubs, as well as retail stores.
Great, thanks. So today, on the agenda today, hopefully this won't auto advance. Sorry. We'll just have to contend with that for now. Apologies. So on the agenda today, like we said, we're going to talk about the role that promotion plays in encouraging healthy food choices at these various sites. We're going to go over some key concepts and best practices and share some local examples. And hopefully at the end, we'll have some time for questions or for you to share a resource or idea that you have that you'd like folks to know about. And as a reminder, as we go through the webinar, please feel free to type your questions into the chat box. We'll be queuing those up and we'll keep track of that as we go. And depending on timing and everything, we may pause to answer a pertinent question, but otherwise we'll kind of use our time at the end to go through those. And at the end, we may also ask you to raise your hand if you want to give some feedback or ask a question. And like I said earlier, when the webinar is over, we'll share the slides. We've also created a resource index that's not completely comprehensive, but it's got a lot of good resources for all of our audiences today. And we'll share the recording link. So now I'm going to turn it over to Tricia to get us started.
All right, so the first thing we wanted to really talk about was why promotion. And in terms of local and healthy food procurement, it's not just the good thing to do. I know a lot of us are really tied to that story of the support in the community, but it's also a really strong economic benefit to you as well. And in order for it to be an economic benefit, you need to share that story. So promotion is really important in order to get the word out about the good work that you are already doing. So, in terms of economics, your margins can stay the same as it would in any product, even if the local healthy product is a little more expensive. But you can't just let it sit on the shelf or in the cooler, letting the price tag, do all that talking. So really need to share that story, like I said, and most people want to be healthier and want to support their community. So if you tell them that story, you can help them make that change. In terms of after you've made those new offerings, the challenge is that your customers have purchasing habits that they've already really committed to, and they're deeply ingrained in us and in our shoppers. They're not really typically thinking all that much when they're making these decisions. They're really ingrained in them already. And so you have to think about yourself and how hard it is for you to change and really apply that to your customer as well. So one of the keys here is that we really only learn new habits by doing things. So you can give them a nudge by offering tastings or samples. If you get them to buy it first or try it once, they're often a lot more likely to buy it again. So giving them a nudge through those taste testings, special promotions, often gives them the nudge they need to try it first. Then in terms of educating your community, promotion used well is really education. And so through your signage, through your conversations during taste testings, you can really help customers learn more about the food that they're eating, how it affects them, how it affects their community, and help educate those around you. So these photos here are just a few examples of some of the stuff we do with Taste the Local Difference, and a few brands out there that can help promote local and healthy products. So one of the things you'll see here is a local farmer bio that helps connect that product that somebody is thinking about purchasing to somebody in their community with a face, with a name, with a little bio about them there too. And I will turn this over to Nikki now.
Thanks. We're going to get started with key concepts.
All right, we are going to begin. There are a few terms we'll be using and referring to a lot throughout this webinar, so we want to start by ensuring we're all on the same page about what we're talking about when we use these terms, as they can mean different things to different people. So first, we'll start with healthy or healthy food. When I ask someone what they mean when they say healthy food, a common response is good for you or not unhealthy. Dig a little deeper and you generally get an explanation about having the right mix of nutrients and food groups to support one's health. Essentially, this is the traditional nutrition approach, a reductionist perspective that's aligned with the biomedical model of health. In this traditional nutrition approach, food is in fact broken down into the components of which it's made, like vitamins, carbohydrates, etc., which are then considered to be a measure of health. So under this model, a prescribed nutritional shake could take the place of eating whole food because it yields a lab-based outcome needed, for example, to discharge a patient from the hospital. However, food, from the way it's grown, packaged, shipped, consumed, and discarded, has a variety of health consequences for the health of individuals, families, communities, and our environment. So if we take a step back and consider, we see that in fact, health happens across the supply chain from farm to fork. Healthy food isn't just about the nutritional components. Healthy food comes from a healthy food system. This approach to defining healthy food, called environmental nutrition, examines the public health impacts of social, economic, and environmental factors related to the entire food system. It encompasses both the direct impacts of the contemporary US diet on human health, so think chronic disease epidemic, as well as the indirect health impacts associated with the conventional industrial food system. If you take a look at the graphic on the screen, this was created to display this environmental nutrition perspective, noting that while a traditional nutrition approach asks how much vitamin C and other nutrients an apple contains, environmental nutrition guides us to ask whether the apple was grown with toxic pesticides, whether the workers who grew it were treated justly, was the water in our aquatic and soil ecosystems contaminated by certain production practices, and what are the implications of that for surrounding communities and their food and water supply, or which individuals and communities actually had access to purchase this apple. From this perspective, not all apples are created equal. A given apple's path from farm to plate can result in greater or lesser health, social, and environmental benefits. To rework a familiar saying, we might ask, which apple a day is more likely to keep the doctor away? According to the environmental nutrition approach, healthy food must be defined not only by the nutritional quality, but equally by a food system that is economically viable, environmentally sustainable, and supportive of human dignity and justice. And today, when we refer to healthy food, we use this definition, employing an environmental nutrition or food systems approach. If you're interested in learning more about this approach, Healthcare Without Harm's Healthy Food and Healthcare team released a white paper on environmental nutrition, which distills current research on the impacts of food, nutrition, environment, and public health. We've included a link to this in the handout we've mentioned, and we'll send out information about this and other resources in the follow-up webinar email. And while this may or may not be the first time you're hearing of an environmental nutrition approach, we want to note that while it's just making its way to center stage in the US, it was articulated as early as 1997 by a United Nations Nutrition Committee formed after the World Food Conference. And since then, the concept has been taken up by leading health professional associations and scientific institutions like the US Institute of Medicine, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the American Public Health Association, the Nurses Association, and others. These are just a few examples to note that there are many health professional association statements, scientific papers, and primers, both from the US and global entities supporting this approach. So it isn't just the focus of it's not the focus of today's webinar, so don't want to go into more depth about these references, but did want to make the point to demonstrate that the need to take a food systems approach to defining healthy food versus a traditional reductionist view of nutrition is growing within health professions broadly. It's not just unique to the group hosting the webinar today, and there's a number of resources we can point you to explore this concept further. So hopefully what's clear is that today when we use the term healthy food, we're using this environmental nutrition approach to defining and understanding health. Therefore, healthy takes into account not just nutrition content and how much we eat, but healthy food comes from a healthy food system, one that's ecologically sound, economically viable, and socially responsible. Now for our next key concept.
Okay, thanks. So local is also kind of a ambiguous term, as you probably are aware. So we wanted to just point out a few ways that folks define this and just kind of cover it a little bit. So the term is subjective. Here you have on the screen an example from Healthcare Without Harm. And so for the tracking purposes to be able to, make statements about how local are we actually, how local are we actually purchasing, how much local are we purchasing, hospitals that have signed on to various Healthcare Without Harm projects have been using this definition, which is saying that it's grown within 250 miles of the facility. And then it breaks it down even further for processed foods. So just saying that the majority of the ingredients were grown and raised within 250 miles of the facility. So that's just one way to do it. And so ways that folks define local tend to be around some sort of travel radius, mileage, some even say like travel time, like within a day's drive. And it could be, it really, really ranges. We've heard 30 miles, 100 miles, 250. And even a little further out. A couple other words people use to define local, we've been hearing things like food shed or commuting district. Those are a little more ambiguous, but kind of community defined. And also grown in Michigan. So if it was grown in the state, we consider it local, So a lot of people, come up usually with some kind of combination of all of the above to make that definition. And what's important is that you're communicating about what you mean when you say local. So here you see an example from Bronson Healthcare, their omelet bar. This was from actually last week. It says they're featuring local farm fresh eggs. And it's a good example. It tells the person considering, going to that omelet bar, here's the price and here's where the eggs are from. There's of course more that could be part of that signage to tell that story, but it's just an example of a way to communicate what's the deal with that local ingredient. And then Trisha also provided these images that I believe are either stickers. Maybe she can clarify. Go ahead.
So they're stickers that go on some Taste the Local Difference signage that we have. Basically, we try to answer the question of what is local by letting the consumer or client decide. So we give them the information they need, which is how far from where they're standing something is grown or made, and we use these little mileage marker stickers to indicate that. So we have, as far out as grown in Michigan in general, and then can place these little stickers on the mileage marker for if it's within 250 miles, if it's within 100 miles, if it's within even 25 miles. So that's what those are used for.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways folks can define local and share that with the customer or client. And just so everyone knows, Michigan Farm to Institution Network, earlier this year, we did a little study that was just asking all different kinds of institutions, so, education, healthcare, and others, what their definition of local is. So we will be releasing the results of that study a little bit later this year, and we'll make sure you guys get that. And you can also get it by signing up for our newsletter. All right. So we turn over to seasonal.
All right. So another term that we're finding in the Healthy Food Service guidelines that a lot of us are implementing with this Building Healthy Communities grant is seasonal. And when it comes to produce, the peak harvest time usually coincides with when flavor and nutrients are at their best within that produce. So frankly, why wouldn't you want to offer produce when it's at its best? So that's why we use the term seasonal. When you're planning out menus or purchasing, following a local Michigan produce availability chart like this, one that you see here, that was made from MSU's Center for Regional Food Systems, is a really good tool. And really seasonality and local are super important partners, because when you're purchasing from local sources, it means the food won't have to travel as far from being picked to consuming the product. and that really helps you ensure that it's been picked at its peak.
Great. So another term that we often use is sustainable. So we'll just kind of quickly touch on this. Really broadly, you could think of sustainable as being, products that are produced in a manner that sort of limits the harm to the environment, public health, animal welfare, and hopefully it's promoting social and economic well-being. And it kind of ties back into the environmental nutrition definition that Nikki shared earlier. So we're referencing it because a lot of times when we're seeking a sustainable product, we're looking to have an impact somewhere or on one or more of these sort of areas, so that environmental health, social and cultural, and animal welfare and or animal welfare. So that's generally what folks mean when they say sustainable. In terms of food procurement, a lot of times what happens is we have to rely on some kind of third-party certification or verification to help us know what are these products meeting a sustainable criteria. And so these are some of the logos here on the screen of just some of the different organizations that certify. And then there's also label claim verification. So when people say grass-fed, free range, like all those different claims that are on the label, some of them are verified and some of them aren't. And that's all there to help consumers, but including food buyers, kind of be able to rely on that label to know that what they're getting is what they are asking for. Not everyone has the time or ability to go visit the farm and create your own checklist and talk to the farmer. And some people can do that, and that's wonderful. But it's not necessarily going to work for everyone. So that's we're kind of tracking on the transparency in the food system. We want to know what our impacts are going to be and be able to measure that if possible. And these things do also help tell the story of the food and the farmers. Because it means that someone has gone through quite a bit of auditing and education to be able to have one of these certifications. All right, next up.
Great. So on the right of the slide, you'll see a definition from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention about what the food environment is, and that really gives a broad perspective on when you talk about systems thinking and how that influences food choices. That's really what we're talking about when we say food environment. So the physical presence of food that affects a person's diet, so their ability to procure that food, whether you only have bodegas in your neighborhood and they only offer, maybe fresh bananas and the rest is processed food, or you have a small rural grocery store where everything is either frozen or highly processed, or there's very limited fresh options. Those are just things to think about when you're talking about a food environment. That's also what they're referring to when they talk about the distribution of food stores, food service, any physical entity by which food may be obtained. So can they go to fast food restaurants, or is there a farmer's market nearby? Is there a cafeteria where they're getting the majority of their food? And then that also applies to the connected system that allows access to that food. So do they have adequate transportation? Do we have adequate public transportation? If there's something where the nearest grocery store selling fresh produce is 5 miles away, that's a real burden on an urban family. So it's something to keep in mind. And that's sort of the broad systems perspective. The piece that I like to tie into what we're doing here today with this webinar is I think of it really in the context of schools. That's where the majority of my work happens. And I think of it in terms of the Smarter Snacks guidelines that came out with the 2010 Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act. So people were sort of surprised that suddenly the National School Lunch Program was going to try to influence school snacks and bake sales. You might have heard a lot of press about this. And really what I think it's important to keep in mind is that that influences the overall food environment, the experience of going to that place and what's offered to the clients, which in that case are students in the case of schools. So I think it really does help to have a little bit, you try to remove yourself out of your silo of just promotion or just procurement. It's important to keep the broadest version of your environment in mind. And so this picture that I have here is actually from one of the pantries that we work with, Father Fred, which you'll hear more about in just a few minutes. But I love that they have these large images of fresh fruits and vegetables on the top of their pantry. One, it's just an aesthetically pleasing component of their space, which you'll hear from Tricia is a really important component in increasing consumption and self-selecting for healthier options. But it's also just as in terms of a pleasant experience and something that gives you a subtle cue to choose healthier options, it's a really nice touch. So there's a lot of things that you'll hear about that contribute to this overall thing, but I think it's just a good idea to keep this in mind when you talk about making these little changes. You don't need to do all of it at once, but it helps to have it in the background when you're making decisions about what small changes you can make.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, so spectrum of scale. This is one of my favorite stories if you ever feel like you're not doing enough. So this is George, who was in kindergarten at one of the schools that I worked with a couple of years ago. And this is a photo of their gigantic hoop house. They have a 20-foot by 30-foot production capacity hoop house. And it really was more than what the school could handle. This is a picture, though, of George harvesting rocks from the school garden because there wasn't anything we could plant that day. It was really cold. There were tears in the siding. And he spent the whole hour that we had with their class harvesting rocks from the garden. And then he came out of that activity and said, you know, I really think that I want to be a farmer when I grow up. And it's just a really important thing to keep in mind when you start to think that you're not doing enough, that really the end result is that you want your clients or the end user to get something out of it. And it can be incredibly small. Genuinely picking rocks out of the ground and putting them in a bucket was something that was meaningful enough to this kid to help him decide he wants to be a farmer when he grows up. You know, and he's 5, so that's not exactly something that's innately appealing to a 5-year-old. So I think that's just something I try to emphasize when I'm working with people that are bogged down in, I can't do all of this, or we don't have a big enough budget to make this work. It's really important to work with a scale that works for you. Don't think that you have to have this huge perspective on everything you could ever do and just max out that laundry list. So don't be afraid to start small. You can always increase as the program succeeds. Try not to bite off more than you can chew. So this was a good example of something where there had been a nonprofit partner at the school that had installed this huge hoop house, and really it just, due to funding and transitions in staff, wasn't able to be maintained. And it's become a bit of an eyesore at the school, and we've had that happen with other places as well. So I think it's really important to have a robust plan in place, and better to start small than to have a big thing happen that doesn't go well. So don't feel like you're not doing enough. And the first thing I like to encourage people to do is to learn about successful models and choose what works best for you from that. Don't feel like you need to do everything, but just pick 1 or 2 things that sound like something that's manageable and start with that. So this just gives you another example of some of the different scales that we've had with different projects. So it can be as simple as putting up signage and posters, doing a monthly feature like Harvest of the Month, which you'll hear about in just a minute. And those pictures on the left are from Cultivate Michigan, which those resources are available online, and you'll see them in the resources at the end of the webinar. You can do a series of brown bag lunch discussions, something as simple as starting the community conversation about what you could do at your institution, or something larger and more complex, like overhauling the design of your cafeteria. If you look at Smarter Lunchrooms, which is another resource that you'll hear about at the end of this webinar, they do a lot of just simple design work that can influence behavioral changes. Putting fresh food first, you'll hear about that when we talk about pantries as well. It just encourages subtle cues, again, with the same thing of that fresh fruits and vegetables being painted on the walls. Little subtle things that are easy to do, or at least relatively easy to do, much more easy than deciding to have an on-site farmer's market or a huge farm or a garden. It just allows a lot of different opportunities.
Great. So now we're going to turn it over to Tricia, and she'll give us some great best practices.
Okay. So our first best practice is attractiveness, visibility, and layout. Again, we're really trying to change behavior here. So we need to make the healthy decisions easy and the old habits of choosing chips or sodas difficult. And that really has a lot to do with making the fresh fruits and vegetables visible, easy to get to. As Megan said, placing them at the beginning of the shopping or dining area really helps to make that change happen. And it's really, capturing attention is really about presentation. So making displays, really well organized and visually appealing, combining them with great signage that's clean and clear, and really, if it's a retail area, discarding any spoiled produce items there too really makes a big difference to how appealing the display might be. Another piece is really repetitive exposure too. So doing this over and over again, making sure those signs are visible throughout the shopping area really contributes to the choices that customers are going to be making. The next best practice is convenience. So convenience really influences the choices people make. Making healthy foods easy to eat increases their consumption. And so prepackaged fruit and vegetables like these offerings that you see on the left that are available at Munch and Cadillac really makes them more appealing. They're quick. People don't have to think too hard to find them. And in a retail setting, something like healthy recipes near the foods that you're encouraging or want to encourage really helps, because people may be interested in purchasing a vegetable, but if they don't know what it is or they don't know how to use it, the whole idea of purchasing it just seems daunting. So having these recipes, there's so many available online that you could print out and have as handouts, or even have laminated so somebody can quickly snap a photo of it. The next piece is remind and prompt. So again, this whole idea of repetitive exposure. Eating healthier is something a lot of people want to do, but these subtle reminders really, at the right time when they're making purchasing decisions, really can help them assist in making this change and making this effort. So using signage and posters throughout the store, like I mentioned, to keep repeating that idea of healthy local foods that are available. Providing staff training to help encourage promotion of these products. Your staff is connecting with those customers on a daily basis when they're making these decisions. So really having them encourage these options, maybe pointing to these recipes that you have for the healthy products available to your customers really helps. And then cooking demonstrations and taste tests. Like I mentioned, if people taste the product or get to try it first, they're a lot more likely to purchase it. And so having those available, having sampling available, can really help make that first decision. And the last piece here is food procurement and storage. So just as you want to make it easy and convenient for your customers, you really want to find a solution for yourself that makes healthy food procurement the easiest for you as well. So whether it's direct or indirect purchasing, both have their different benefits, pros and cons, and it's really just a preference for what works best for you. And here in Michigan, there's really a simple solution to the lack of fresh produce in the winter. And that can be things like flash frozen products. You see there on the left, Farm to Freezer is a new program here in Northwest Michigan that really makes it easy to have access to fresh, or not fresh, flash frozen products that are locally sourced in the off season if you want to do that. And also storage crops, so root vegetables and things that are available and can be stored over the winter.
All right, and now we're going to talk about another best practice in the concept of evaluation.
All right, so First best practice is plan for evaluation. Most likely you had to make a case to someone to implement change or changes, and when hopes in some form, you likely want to continue your effort or grow your initiative. Being able to show the positive impact on your community, environment, and sales, making the business case, are crucial. Evaluation can also help you learn about how to improve your efforts. What are you doing well? What do customers like? What are areas of improvement? It can also help consumers feel as if they have a voice in the changes, which can help improve buy-in and support for your initiative. The best type of evaluation activities, both in terms of showing impact and getting feedback, all involve some gathering or tracking of information before, during, and after changes made. So planning in advance what information you'll gather, how you'll gather it, who will gather it, how often it will be gathered, and thinking through reporting and sharing how you'll communicate your results and impacts is important. So let's start with where you should start any evaluation effort or conversation, which is by defining the purpose of your evaluation, or purposes, as there can be multiple. Being clear from the start on the primary reason why you're conducting any evaluation can help you keep your efforts manageable and prioritize what must be done versus what's nice to know but not need to know right now. So here are some common purposes to consider. At a very basic level, one purpose of evaluation is tracking progress toward achieving goals and targets, as well as measuring impact and outcomes of changes through time. Hopefully, at some point, you began by defining some clear SMART goals and objectives that you're working to achieve over time. These might be short, medium, or long-term goals, or a combination thereof. For example, 20% local food spend by 2020, or increasing the percent of products offered that meet your definition of healthy by 10% a year, or reducing overall meat purchase and served by 10% a year. Defining metrics and setting up a plan to track progress toward achieving these goals and demonstrating outcomes is one purpose of evaluation. A secondary purpose could be providing accountability for making changes. If you develop a new food service procurement policy or vending machine standards or some other healthy food commitment, how will you know if any action is actually taking place? Working with those who will be involved in making changes, impacted by implementing new policies and protocols, or responsible for gathering and reporting on data to make sure that goals are understood and that you clearly define what will be tracked and measured, as well as what reporting expectations are, helps to hold people accountable for following through and taking action. This type of evaluation can also involve types of monitoring activities, which can help ensure on an ongoing basis that initiatives are being implemented and new policies upheld. This type of evaluation could involve internal staff and/or external contractors. So for example, thinking about vending machine guidelines. You want to plan to take inventory periodically at set intervals through time to ensure they're being stocked with the specified percent of healthy items, that the healthy items meet your definition of healthy, and that promotional and placement rules are being adhered to. Similar monitoring or secret shopping approaches can also be used in cafeterias, retail areas, procurement or purchasing records, and more. And they're all important strategies to help provide accountability for making and sustaining changes. Another common purpose for evaluation is developing support. Two key stakeholder groups with whom evaluation can help develop support are management or leadership and consumers, customers, or the community. First, management or leadership. In defining the purpose of your evaluation efforts, I would encourage you to consider your end audience for reporting impacts and outcomes. You most likely had to make the case to someone to get support for your initiative and the changes you wanted to make. Most likely, the pitch you made was some combination of, one, an ethical or moral case. So think transforming the types of food offered to address the health of individuals, communities, the environment. And two, a business case, because food establishments, whether vending, cafeteria, corner stores, in the end, they must maintain a positive budget to stay in business. Now consider, who will you be reporting back to about the initiative? Who will make decisions about what resources are allocated to you for it, and if you can continue or grow this work? What will be most important to them and of greatest interest to these key stakeholders and decision makers? While the ethical moral case is certainly important, often the business case is most compelling. So planning to track sales over time is a key indicator, both overall sales and of specific items or categories is important to plan for so you're well equipped to make the business case for your work. Then, in terms of developing support, there's the consumer and customer or community audience. I'll say it, and I'm sure you all know, not all healthy changes are happily received. Many folks look forward to that Coke or that cookie after a long day, or they enjoy the chicken tenders and fries at lunch after a grueling class or surgery, even though they know they perhaps shouldn't indulge in these options. Food is very social, cultural, emotional, and something that individuals can exert control over each day with our decisions. So it's certainly important to acknowledge in making these changes and be prepared for the fact that likely any notable change will come with some disturbance. To this end, communicating about the changes and why they're being made in a positive way is key to promoting understanding and getting ahead of any big reaction. And this is where evaluation can come in as well. One can take this effort a step further by actually involving customers or consumers in the decision-making process. This can be done fairly simply by a quick survey asking them what changes they want to see or which improvements or new offering they prefer, providing some options for them to choose from that are all potentially on the menu for change that you're considering, and letting them speak up. This small effort can go a long way towards helping them feel like they have a voice. And overall, this type of evaluation of customer desires, perceptions, and feedback can help improve programs, help gain internal support, and get ahead of or even quell potential pushback. So lastly, in addition to help garner support from consumers, evaluation can help you understand how customers perceive changes. Simple evaluation activities like surveys or feedback or input cards can help you find out what you're doing well, what people like, and can help improve programs and identify areas where more support, resources, or tweaks are needed. So the first step is defining the purpose of your evaluation. And in doing so, remember to consider the end user of your findings. Like is listed on here, is your evaluation primarily to determine progress toward achieving outcomes, to improve programs or policies, for monitoring and to provide accountability that changes are being implemented, or to develop support within management, leadership, or consumers in the community? Ideally, you want it to include some mix of these evaluation purposes, including both what we call process and outcome evaluation, which is to say it'll help tell if you're achieving your end goals and objectives and give feedback about what you're doing well and areas for improvement. So I've already mentioned these two types of evaluation already. To give a technical name or category to them, process evaluation is focused on helping improve the quality and effectiveness of the initiative, helping to identify strengths, weaknesses, areas for improvement. These can be some of the qualitative feedback mechanisms we've discussed, like surveys, input cards, or brief interviews with key stakeholders, which would be staff, consumers, and so forth. Process evaluation can also be quantitative, as the sample evaluation questions on the slide get at, providing some hard data or numbers. Some goals, ultimate goals, are bigger picture and longer term, and gathering some data to demonstrate incremental steps and communicate reach and impact along the way to making these bigger changes and achieving larger outcomes or goals is certainly important. And having a mix of qualitative, which gives you useful context and storytelling, and quantitative is best. And the same goes for outcome evaluation. Again, outcome evaluation is focused on assessing whether the expected outcomes are achieved. In developing, consider who will use the evaluation results, a team of stakeholders who develop the initiative, like a wellness committee, leadership, consumers, employees, all of the above, some mix thereof. Evaluation can easily grow and become too much. To help focus your evaluation questions, think about what you're measuring. Think of the information you'll gather and how it will actually be used, to whom it matters, and what they really want to know. So a few examples of key outcome questions are here on the screen. What percentage of food and bev offerings meet the defined standards? What percent of healthier items are being promoted? What percent decrease in meat and poultry purchasing annually do you see over time? And so forth. And again, these tie back to your overall specific goals, outcomes, and measures. These are mostly quantitative. I did want to mention incorporating some sort of qualitative information into your plan is helpful to understand and communicate what these numbers actually mean in terms of the real life impacts felt by staff, students, customers, community members, and so forth. So in telling your impact, you want to be able to make these more than just numbers, and the qualitative information you gather via surveys or interviews can help tell the story that these numbers and metrics demonstrate. To wrap up, developing any type or level of evaluation follows a few basic steps, many of which we've already mentioned. They're again summarized here on the screen. What do you want to know? What will you measure? What type of data do you need? Identifying those data sources. So where can you find it? And there are multiple ways to track and determine success. So you could request vendor reports to identify how food and beverage orders and items change over time, track revenue or for specific items, and after changes take place. You could conduct a before and after environmental scan to determine changes or percentages of healthy and unhealthy items. You could survey staff, customers, and so forth before and after to assess satisfaction with offerings, perceptions of the food environment, likelihood to shop on or off campus. These are just a few examples. The point is to decide and determine ahead of time so you're ready to track. And then, of course, how will you collect it? How often? Who is responsible? And communicating and sharing them back to tell your story. The final evaluation thought I'll leave you with, like the changes being implemented, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Doing some evaluation and tracking is better than nothing, and you can change or modify or add to evaluation over time. Most important is clearly defining what you need most to make the case for your changes or initiative, and determining clearly how it will happen and who is responsible for what steps. And then in the end, making sure you're sharing and communicating to tell the story. I do want to mention there are many nationally recognized best practice examples and frameworks for setting goals for tracking that you can learn from and build off of. And these can also help align your work with national efforts within your sector. So as you track the local impact of your efforts, you can also tell the story of how you're contributing to change at a larger systems level via statewide or nationwide coalitions or networks. We'll mention some of the specific ones at the end of the webinar and provide links, but for reference, I'm talking about things like Healthcare Without Harm, Practice Green Health, Healthier Hospitals for the healthcare sector. There's Farm to School, Real Food Challenge, School Food Focus for school and universities, and more. And we'll have links and guides to these. Towards the end, the point being, you don't have to start from zero and reinvent the wheel with evaluation. There's a lot out there to help guide you and provide a solid starting point and tools to work with.
Thank you. So now we'll move on to sharing some examples, and I believe we have all local examples, local to Michigan. So we'll start with schools.
Great. This is Megan again. So I wanted to introduce just the three main components of school healthy food environments, which are the cafeteria, the classroom, and the garden. So you don't have to work in all of these in order to have a healthy food program, but they're important to keep in mind when you're building that systems approach to a healthy food environment. So the first example is Boyne Falls Public School, and this is the cafeteria. So you probably recognize this even if you can't make it out exactly. This is a school lunch menu. And one of the, just a few dishes that I want to point out here that really stood out to me when we began to partner with this school, where you can see on Thursday, March 26th or 24th, pork carnitas with confetti corn and chipotle Caesar salad. I mean, to me, growing up with hot lunch, that just is something that you don't see. And knowing this chef, he really does all this stuff from scratch. So, you know, on Wednesday, March 9th, and it says pulled pork sandwich with Granny Smith coleslaw, he's making that all in-house from scratch. Now, granted, this is a small rural school. They have 151 students, I think was their count last year, and they're K-12. And he just really has the support of his administration to get to do this fresh program. They brought in a new superintendent a couple of years ago, and they really wanted to brand themselves as an institution that was doing the best they possibly could for fresh food. And they happened to be connected to a classically trained chef who had relocated and after 30 years in the culinary world wanted to get out of the mainstream culinary business and really start feeding kids great food. So you can watch a whole video about Chef Nathan Bates at that tiny URL that's in the bottom right-hand corner. He's really just an inspiration and someone that really understands why it's so important to feed our children the healthiest food possible, and really how to navigate the National School Lunch Program and the federal guidelines for as far as nutrition standards are concerned, while also being able to meet a food service budget and work with local farms. He has a garden right out back of his cafeteria. He has a beautiful salad bar, and he's actually had high school photography students take photos of his salad bar in the school cafeteria and then do a photo contest within the cafeteria, posting them on walls throughout the space. It's really a beautiful sight to see. A few things that Nate doesn't do but will do hopefully in the coming year that he's improving through this Building Healthy Communities grant. He is going to install a kindergartner-sized salad bar. So one of the issues that we've seen with salad bars in particular being the main vehicle for giving kids fresh local food, while that's a great outlet, sometimes you just have students that physically can't reach it. I mean, a 4-year-old cannot actually see above the salad bar serving area. So there's just some logistical things to consider, as well as tongs. And I know some food service directors are hesitant to offer that self-select model to such young students. But I think when you really start to see the role of training and the role of the lunch aides, if you have a good relationship with your lunch aides and your school administration, kids catch on pretty quickly and they begin to really embrace the idea of trying new foods. The other thing that helps with that, Tricia mentioned sampling in retail stores, and I think this applies to every outlet, is doing some sort of sampling, or in school cafeterias we refer to it as taste testing. So usually these are recipes that meet USDA guidelines. They're out of a myriad of food service resources that you'll actually hear about at the end of this webinar again. Beautiful recipes that are already made up that are meant to meet the USDA standards, be palatable to kids, and also be something that's really healthy and fresh and can often feature local foods. Taste testing is a great way to do that. We love to have the kids vote on whether they tried it, they liked it, or they loved it. We say tried it because you'll inevitably hear from kids that they didn't like it or they hate it or it's gross. And it gives them a way to still have the autonomy and engagement of voting without putting something negative forward about the recipe. And then what our food service directors have done really successfully is to then integrate those recipes into their school lunch menus. So you'll feature a product, you'll have a taste test or two with different recipes, you'll find out what the response is from your students or your pantry clients or your retail clients, or your hospital cafeteria visitors, and be able to get some feedback before you invest in having that on your menu, before you buy all of the ingredients and then find out that it doesn't sell. So it's a really great way to get that engagement piece. And one of the easiest ways we've gotten some of our more hesitant schools or our tighter budget schools to buy into that was through a Harvest of the Month program. So you saw with the Cultivate Michigan pieces, they have seasonal features. And that, again, goes season by season, really, and it applies to a broad range of institutions. There are other Harvest of the Month features, and you'll find some of them, again, in the resources that we're referencing here. You feature one local product each month. You can do a taste test on it. You can integrate it with a few other of your school elements, whether that's the cafeteria and the garden. It just helps to get that big picture perspective and to start influencing those habits of your consumers. And again, that video, if you want to learn more about Nate, is on the bottom right-hand corner there. We can go to the next one. So gardens, they're one of my favorite components to school, farm-to-school programs and teaching kids about healthy local food. I always like to say that you can't guarantee that a kid will eat it if they've grown it, but you can guarantee that they will try it. I can tell you from experience that I've had kids harvesting, clearing the garden for the season, and this kid pulls up this totally petrified beet from 2 seasons ago that, you know, everybody forgot about it. It's just gross. It's half rotted, and he wants to eat it. And this is a 3rd grader. So trying to get kids, really forcing them to eat it in an environment that they're not happy about won't work. But a garden is a really great way to get some investment and engagement from the kids, and they're so curious about this thing that they've worked really hard to grow that you'll get them to try just about anything, which is really exciting. They won't love it innately. They need to try things multiple times. There's a lot of behavioral research on how to influence changes in dietary preferences, and a lot of that has to do with repetition. So just because they grew it doesn't mean they'll instantly love it, but it does mean they'll try it, which can often be half the battle with kids. So this picture is from Interlochen Elementary, which sadly is closed now. They won't be opening in this coming school year, but they just did such a good job of working together as a school community to integrate the garden with their classroom experience that I wanted to showcase them. They were an international baccalaureate school for the past year. They really focused on integrating their garden with their whole school environment. So they did school events in the garden. When they did an open house, they made sure that the garden educators were there. They had worm bins in a variety of classrooms, which if you're not familiar with them, they're vermicomposting bins. They're super easy to make. On a really small budget, you can make 10 of them for less than $100. They're really just a Rubbermaid tote with a few holes drilled in it. You can do them a variety of ways, but it's a great way to have something that's connecting the kids to nature in the classroom in a way that's still safe and sort of removed from the overall environment. You don't need to haul in a truckload of sand or bring in a bunch of plants. It's a really nice contained way to still bring the garden into the classroom. They had different grades planting different transplants, what would grow into transplants for older grades and vice versa with the younger grades. They had gotten some grow lights from the local police department. It's a great tip if you're interested in looking into growing a school garden. Check with your local police department and see if they have any grow lights. They will donate to you if you can prove that you are with a school. That's a really great way to get your transplant started, especially in Michigan when we can't grow all year long. They did a Plants Around the World component. International Baccalaureate really focuses on a global perspective, if you're not familiar with the curriculum. So they did gardens where they had plants from around the world, and they talked about how that integrated with different cultural elements that they were studying in the classroom. They also had a beautiful hydroponic tower garden, which is another nice way that you can integrate it into the classroom. And they had 12 raised beds in the back, which is just a great way to get kids out there, get their hands in the dirt. You can start as simple as a windowsill garden. You could have just 2 raised beds, 1 or 2, where all the classes come out and take turns with them. I've seen it at schools where you have 1 raised bed for each class. I've seen schools where you have raised beds for each class and a hoop house and a permaculture garden, which if you're not familiar with that term is something where you have perennial plants that will come back year after year. And it actually is a garden itself. It can often be a nice meditation circle or something where kids can go to have an outdoor classroom. You see a lot of perennial features or permaculture gardening, permaculture landscaping in those spaces as well. So the last one, and what I think people most traditionally associate with schools, obviously, but not necessarily farm to school, is the classroom. So a really important component in all of this, whatever institution you work with, is education. And for kids, it's kind of surprising, even in Michigan, that you'll have kids, especially in high-need communities, that just haven't been exposed to fresh produce. They don't know what local means. They haven't had local produce. We've had stories of kids going into the cafeteria and not recognizing fresh peaches because they'd only had canned, cleaned peaches. I've had kids go into a classroom, children that have grown up in Michigan, been in Michigan their whole life, and they don't recognize a blueberry. They've never tasted a fresh blueberry, which can be hard to believe at times, but it's a really important component of making sure that you have a successful food service model, to make sure that there's some sort of education with it. If that needs to come in the form of a simple taste test in the cafeteria, that's more than enough. It's more than nothing. But what we've really had success with at the intermediate school district in our region, Traverse Bay Area Intermediate School District, is working with them on a curriculum integration project. So really making sure that these fun and engaging farm to school lessons that either feature kids cooking or kids working in the garden or just learning about local agriculture and healthy eating are integrated into what the teacher is already being asked to teach through their nutrition or through their curriculum standards. So Common Core, Next Generation Science Standards, Social Studies C3. It really allows them to feel like it's not just an add-on, that it's truly integrated in what they're teaching. So a good example of this is our square foot gardening lesson. So 3rd and 4th graders need to learn area and perimeter as part of their math curriculum. And if you want to get 3rd and 4th graders really engaged in area and perimeter, try having them do a square foot gardening lesson. They go out to the garden bed, or you can even do this indoors. I've done it indoors when you have a rainy day. You can go out and set up stakes to line up string to measure out square feet. And you can talk about how much space each plant takes up. It really allows the kids to get a great visual on what area and perimeter mean. So the physical space that a plant takes up is relative to the area of that bed. And then you talk about how if you were to put up a fence because you wanted to keep the rabbits out of your garden, how long of a fence would you need? And they measure it and they learn that that's perimeter. There's a lot of great examples of that type of lesson, and teachers have told us that that really works for them because they find value in it and can use that to teach their curriculum whether or not there's a garden at the school, whether or not there's a garden educator or another nonprofit coming in, like Food Corps, which we've done a lot of work with. We've been part of the Food Corps program for 5 years now. All this stuff is available online, as well as a lot of additional resources for food service, a lot of information on our Harvest of the Month program, and a ton of resources for teachers, lesson plans, a lot of other things that might be helpful if you're looking at doing some sort of education with promoting local food.
All right, thank you, Megan. Okay, so for some healthcare examples, just wanted to talk, a lot of this stuff we already covered, and what I think is fun is that what's good for the kiddos often is good for adults with some light adaptation. So often in healthcare, we're seeing, monthly features, weekly, quarterly features. Right now at Beaumont in Royal Oak, Beaumont Hospital in Royal Oak, it's Michigan Month. So the food service director, Maureen, was making sure that 3 Michigan-grown vegetables are on the cafeteria line every single day. 2 of them were the same. So I think it was sweet corn and I think a kind of bean. I'm not sure. And then she had a rotating vegetable and everything was Michigan grown, and they were promoting it to kind of feature that food. Other things, so we've talked about, posters, decals, labels, label packaging, whether you're promoting the healthy aspect of it, the local aspect of it, the sustainable aspect, whatever, piece is important to you in your community. You can get that across through those posters and signage. A couple other things that we maybe didn't go into as much, and I'll show some examples in a moment. Featuring local and sustainable in the hospital retail area. So many hospitals have a gift shop. To start small, you could have some dry beans in a bag and make a point of having a sign that says, these are the same beans that we're cooking within the cafeteria. You can take them home. Here's a little recipe. And that example comes from Bronson and Battle Creek. They're doing that along with many other things. More complex things like establishing a farm or a garden on site. Those are things the healthcare industry is taking on. And also for the staff primarily, creating a CSA pickup, maybe in conjunction with a farmer's market on site. So CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. And generally that means that you become a member of a CSA by paying upfront a certain amount for a certain number of boxes throughout the growing season. And that way the farmer has, that money up front to hand, and he knows how much he or she is making through that CSA pickup. And then, they come either, with a truck and do a delivery, or they set up a farm stand or participate in a farmer's market on site where staff and potentially other community members are coming through and doing their CSA pickups and maybe doing a little shopping for other healthy products. And so it's an immersive environment, and we have some photos of that. And I also wanted to mention, something a couple communities are doing here, including some of our partners, and through a program we help coordinate, Fresh Prescription in Detroit, or other nutrition incentive programs where there's a prescription for the fresh fruits and vegetables, and it's going to low income community members that have like a chronic diet related disease. So there's a prescription that goes out, helps them purchase fresh local fruits and vegetables somewhere near in their community. So those are other programs to look into. Okay, so here's a couple of examples. So some signage and posters. On the left side, you can see some signage and posters from Bronson Healthcare. The top is from Kalamazoo. The bottom is from the Battle Creek site. And it can be fancy and designed, like the top picture, or it can just be, using the existing infrastructure you have. If you have a sign board, a poster board, printing or writing out, hey, we serve local products. Here's what we're serving right now. Here's what's available. Over here, we have our friends at Beaumont, with the Cultivate Michigan decal. That's, on the breath guard there. So folks know that when they're ordering, they're getting something that was grown in Michigan, and maybe they ask the staff about it. Also celebrating things like Food Day. That's another thing. October 24th, a lot of times it extends into the month of October because there's a lot going on. That's, a peak harvest season for Michigan. So people are all ready to celebrate, local Michigan food. So you can take advantage of things like Food Day, or a traditional, a staff picnic or something that you do to celebrate the staff, and use that time to do tastings, to highlight different local products, to see how well those things sell, and do that evaluation at that event, that one-time event, to kind of gauge where could you take this. And then it won't be a surprise if it shows up, on the menu later on. All right, so farmers markets. I'm going to show you two examples because this is Michigan and we always are concerned about, seasonality. And so if you recall from the seasonality chart a few slides ago, that chart references, the time that product is fresh in season, where it can be where the season can be extended through season extension, things like a hoop house, or when those products can be in storage. So you can see here at the Bronson Methodist site here, the winter market that they host. They've got a lot of storage crops here, as well as some season extension things. And you see the staff and other community members coming by and getting engaged in this local purchasing, for themselves. Meanwhile, it's right next to the cafeteria. It's sort of part of the cafeteria area. And some of those same products are going to be on the cafeteria line. So it helps promote making those choices both for themselves at home and also at work. So that's the winter market. And then here's an example of a summer market at Beaumont Hospital. And again, you can see the mix of folks that are there, some community members, families, visitors to the hospital. Maybe there's some more traditional summer crops that are available here. So you can have a market throughout any different season. And there's lots of resources. And one thing that we forgot to put in the resources, but we'll add it. Michigan Farmers Market Association has a training available for market managers. And so there are resources and support out there for folks who want to start a market. It's not something you have to invent all by yourself. There's a lot of resources to help you out. So again, gardens and farms are another thing that people are doing. You can see here some examples from the farm at St. Joe's down in Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti area. Theirs is a special site. That's an accessible garden that an accessible area that they've created for folks who might be coming in for therapy reasons, but it also is in food production, and they can harvest that and use it either in the cafeteria or for a farm stand and what have you. Over here on the right side is Henry Ford Health System in West Bloomfield. So that's the guy under the table, the hydroponic table there is our friend Trevor. And so he's teaching a group of students from Waterford schools about hydroponics. They run a lot of visitor tours of their greenhouse there, and they always include the demonstration kitchen, which they have like a state-of-the-art demonstration kitchen. So they're seeing how food is grown, how it's incorporated into the cafeteria, and how they might do something like make kale chips at home. So all of these things, when it's integrated, similar to how gardens are integrated into the school curriculum, as anchor institutions in the community, hospitals and healthcare facilities are often doing a lot of a lot of educational work, and these are key pieces that can, skyrocket the engagement of the community in learning about healthy food choices. All right, and we'll turn it over to Tricia for retail.
All right, so here are a few strategies that are being used throughout retail stores in our area. The first one being signage. So a really good strategy is incorporating local healthy products on the shelf with other products that may not be local. So the piece about signage is really differentiating those products when they're on the shelf together. What's important about that is keeping them at eye level whenever possible. And actually, we've learned too that floor decals, the floor is kind of a new territory in retail and other institutions and schools and such too. That is, recent studies are showing that decals can significantly influence purchasing decisions. So I like to connect that, I think, to people being on their phones all the time right now. But really, they're more likely to see signage that's at eye level or on the floor than they are seeing hanging signs these days. The hand that you see here on the left-hand side is our Taste the Local Difference floor decal that says, if you can read that writing there, it says, look up for local choices. And it's something that we put in value-added aisles to really differentiate where local products are. People can look from any end of the aisle and see that there's a local item within that aisle and go find it really quickly. And we have found that it's really popular with children. It's surprising. They kind of look at it like a scavenger hunt and run around the store to find all the hands and pull mom and dad to where the local products are. So that's really exciting. Other retail venues are doing things like a local produce section, which you also see as an example there to your left. This is Tom's Food Stores in Traverse City. And we've got about 5 of their stores with a local produce section about 4 feet wide at this point in time. And it's obviously incorporated into the larger produce cooler in itself, but really branded and identified as being a local section. Other retailers are using end caps that are also branded and highlighted as being a local or healthy product section. And then again, advertising throughout the community outside of your retail store is really important too, to bring in new customers that aren't already visiting you, and helping to tell that story again of what you're doing, the changes that you've made, or sourcing that you're already currently doing to the rest of the community.
Muted.
This page here is a few of those examples that I mentioned. A local product section there, branded in the middle of the deli area with fresh pickled products and apple chips and healthy items that are also locally sourced. Up on the right-hand corner, you'll see Weeby Jammin', which is fresh local jams from Bear Lake, Michigan there. And that's another example of cutting the local healthy item onto the shelf with other items. So if somebody's looking for jam, they'll look in the jam section and see that there's a local option for it. And then on the bottom right-hand corner, we have fresh heirloom tomatoes that are in Olson's food stores right now with the local product sticker on there to really help identify it as being something that's been grown within the community.
So the other group that I work with in addition to schools is food pantries and meal sites as well. So I'll speak a little bit about food pantries, and I'll tell you about one really exceptional one that we have in Traverse City here. One big part that differentiates food pantries and meal sites from other retailers and institutions is clearly the need to serve with dignity. So families that are visiting your institutions are usually in crisis, or they're families that are having lots of other burdens going on. So there's a lot of components into making sure that it's the best experience possible. If you're working with pantries, you've probably heard or maybe even started to move towards a self-shop model, which really goes after the retail experience. So it provides something that feels relatively normal to the consumer now, which is obviously the pantry client in this case. And it provides a level of normalcy that's really important when you have a family going through crisis. And it provides a level of dignity to something where rather than just getting a bag full of food that you don't necessarily want, or that half of it will go into the trash, that it really allows clients to feel as though they are part of this whole system, that they're having some sort of claim into what they're receiving as this aid, which is so critical. So some of the things that we've done with food pantries in Northwest Michigan, we've had them install their own gardens, which help with not only the aesthetics of the space, but also education for the average consumer coming in. Sometimes you find that people actually have a lot of experience with gardening, and they just currently don't live in a place where they have space to garden, so you'll get volunteers for your pantry that way that might not have volunteered otherwise. We've had some really great success stories with procurement for the pantry itself, so not only were they able to engage their clients more directly, but they were able to source more fresh produce from the closest place possible, which is usually right outside the front door, which has been really great. Featuring different promotional activities for healthy food eating. So whether that's putting up more signage, like what Tricia was talking about, thinking of the pantry as trying to create and cultivate that healthy food environment that feels like a retail space, is really important. And there's a lot of things that cross over in terms of applicability with how you can slowly nudge people towards the healthier choices, and promotion is a big part of that. Art on the walls, again, you saw that first picture with Father Fred and where they had those beautiful paintings up there, which, by the way, that was a totally small step that they did really early on when they decided to make a policy that they weren't going to take junk food anymore, so they don't accept soda, and they only accept like birthday cakes and treats, things like that, on rare occasions, because they distribute them to families that are celebrating those milestones, and they monitor that very closely. It's not part of the self-shop model that they offer. But the policy was a big piece. The art was a really small step that they could do. They worked with a local school, and they had art students that just designed these 4x4 panels that are just gorgeous, and again contribute to that slow behavioral nudges that help push people in the direction of healthier choices. Nutrition sheets are another one that's kind of fun. You can do recipes and basic nutrition facts. And Father Fred has actually done a really great job with this, and they're making them coloring sheets for the kids that come into their waiting room. So the idea being that not only does the kid have a fun activity, and if the kid is of reading age, then they can actually get some of the benefit from the educational material posted on that sheet, but the idea is that they take that home and put it on their fridge, or they put it on the coffee table or somewhere in the home, so that that's a reminder for the family of whatever nutritional facts are featured on there. So we can go to the next slide. That'll show you a little bit of Father Fred. So they have, this is what you see when you first walk in. Oh, can you put the garden down? Thanks. So this is what you see when you walk in, which I just love because it's really like a retail display. They have these beautiful produce baskets. It's this gorgeous wood display. They have this cute market umbrella and lights. They have signage about products that might be unfamiliar. What we've been working with them on lately is to actually have clip-on signs for each of the baskets, so that as volunteers are restocking those baskets. And if, I think this was already mentioned, but one great trick that I like to tell my pantry clients is that you can put like a box or newspaper underneath in those baskets if you don't have enough of something to make it appear full. Just the idea that it's full, the idea, perception that there's a bounty there, will make it a more desirable thing. And when they've done behavioral economic studies, it actually encourages people to self-select for that product if it looks like there's an abundance of it. It's these funny little things that once you become familiar with them, they become so intuitive that it starts to really make sense and start to click, but they're just quick little changes that you can make that make a huge difference in terms of what people will self-select. And we're getting them to design clip-on signs that will help the volunteers restock those baskets as well. So when things do get low, that you can put more of that product in, and there won't be something that accidentally gets mislabeled. You put a small picture of the product, name of the product, and then have recipes available nearby, especially for anything that's unfamiliar, like if you get a donation of a bunch of kohlrabi to the food pantry, which we've had happen on several occasions. You know, bananas, potatoes, onions, those will move probably at the same rate regardless of what you're doing. Families are familiar with those. But for the most part, when you add in a new product or you get something donated that is not within the standard rotation, it's really important to emphasize what that product is and how to prepare it and what even the nutritional benefits are of that product if you have clients that are experiencing any sort of health or illness issues. Father Fred also does cooking demonstrations, which are a really important way to get that sampling component in at a food pantry. They've partnered with MSU Extension, which has a great program for doing sampling of recipes that are really low-cost recipes featuring fresh produce. So I'd encourage all of you to look at that. They have eye-catching displays. Again, this is, you know, their beautiful market area. This is the first thing that you see when you come into the pantry. And it really emphasizes all the fresh produce. Of course, I have a picture where it's not stocked with fresh produce, but I promise it does get stocked with beautiful fresh produce. And their newest addition, with help from Building Healthy Communities, is the garden that we saw pop up, and I hope pops up again. Oh. There we go. So the flamingos were not grown in the garden, obviously, but this is a beautiful 10 raised beds of varying heights, so varying soil depths, and they have a trellis there in this old space that was just 4 raised beds just a few months ago. It was a project that we did with our food corps service members, and we found that the wood was treated wood, and there had been wood chips mixed in with the soil, which really is not safe for food production. So we worked with some master gardeners. We got this Building Healthy Communities grant, and we were able to help them install this garden. They got a series of volunteers to design the garden that were actually master gardeners and were already affiliated with the pantry. And they installed a drip irrigation system, and all of this cost less than $2,000. So it really was a wonderful way to encourage clients to check out the healthy food. They've had people asking questions about the garden. They've had people talk about whether they can pick something from the garden. It's really just been a great way to galvanize some momentum around healthy food at the pantry, even though they'd already started doing these policy changes, which again I would highly recommend. But it's something that you can do. If you can't work with someone to change the policy specifically, it's a really great way to create an opportunity for clients to express an interest in healthy food. And of course, people are always curious as to what they're tasting from that. The first thing they've harvested, I think up to this point, they've only harvested radishes, which have been a huge hit, surprisingly, which normally would sit there and wilt and they would end up getting composted. So I think that this is a great way to work with what you have and then also create something new that can create a lot of enthusiasm for what you're working on. And the other overlap that we have with our work with schools is our Harvest of the Month program. So we actually have worked with the pantries that are our sites for this particular opportunity, and they are featuring the same products that we feature in our schools. So all of the schools that we work with are high-need schools. They tend to be really close in proximity, and also obviously in the population served because they're in the same neighborhoods as those high-need schools. So they're featuring the same products and the same recipes the kids are tasting in school, which is a really powerful way to influence the parents without us really having to do a ton more programming. We just provided them the resources that we're already using, and again, all of those are available on the Farm to School website, farmtoschool.tbaisd.org. And the other piece that we're overlapping with is our farmer posters. So one thing that tends to resonate with lots of people is when you put a face to food. Especially resonates with kids, but again, it applies to adults as well. And so it gives you a face and a name to associate with that product. Especially in rural communities, we found that this is really meaningful for families that have some sort of agriculture connection. It gives them someone to associate with the food that is nourishing them. And makes them more willing to try some things that they might not be willing to try otherwise.
All right, thank you. So now we're going to talk about making these changes last. And we'll start with Nikki.
And we are getting ready to wrap up here, so I'll encourage you, if you have questions or things you're thinking about, start to gear them up in the chat box so we can address them as soon as we move into that portion. So we've heard about a lot of best practices, good strategies, lots of exciting things that are being done. And unfortunately, time and again, we hear stories where change and innovation is often the result of an internal champion. Like we hear with many of these, someone's passionate and enthusiastic about a project, an opportunity comes up, and they take an initiative to make it happen. Putting that time and energy is often put into actually making the changes, dealing with the day-to-day details, usually on top of or in addition to other responsibilities, as I'm sure many of you can speak to. And then thinking and planning about the future of the changes, if and how they'll continue, or what might happen if this champion changes roles or leaves the organization or agency. These considerations can fall by the wayside, taking a back seat to the more immediate needs and demands. Yet I'm sure, as most of you can speak to, there is little more disheartening than the idea that all this positive change and energy and impacts one's work so tirelessly to achieve could falter or disintegrate with time, or could leave with the person who's been championing them, because nothing was ever formally put into place to institutionalize the changes, formalize them as a policy, and ensure they continue as standard practices. So while pushing forward an official policy can seem ancillary when limited energies could be focused on implementing the changes that people actually see and feel the impact of every day, taking the time to engage stakeholders, educate a team and leadership, and together move through the process of developing official policies and language to be incorporated into contracts are key elements for ensuring that changes happen as intended, that they're successfully implemented in a meaningful way, and that the impact can and will be sustained through time. So a few key effective strategies for supporting the sustainability of changes. 1, building a team or work group of engaged stakeholders, partners, and champions who represent different responsibilities and backgrounds to be involved in the initiative. Stakeholders can be anyone affected by the changes or food guidelines, as well as those involved in planning and implementing. For example, employees, food service staff, vendors, a food purchasing director, wellness coordinator, dietitian, leadership, consumers, and even supply chain partners. Engaging people from all levels increases the likelihood that the guidelines or the other healthy food changes will be both successful and sustainable. And it also helps develop a sense of accountability, as well as a sense of ownership, so that the initiative and the planned evaluation, the tracking, the reporting, everyone really feels shared accountability, and it doesn't just hold or hinge on one person. So 2, establishing food service guidelines as part of standard operating procedures and communicating these. That's to say, any food served will meet a specific set of well-defined and written criteria, which can include nutrition, local, sustainable, and so forth. Defining clearly written food service guidelines means having something on paper that can be given to anyone who might be interested in serving food, or a contractor you'll be working with, or having an event, and it clearly outlines what any food served or menus developed must meet to be consistent with organizational or institutional policy. So, and then 3 is developing language to include these food service guidelines in purchasing requests for proposals. The number one long-term strategy is that RFPs, requests for proposals, written policies should clearly state the organization's commitment to serving healthy food and explain what that means. You know, that all the food purchased and served needs to meet these basic criteria, whether that's 50% needs to be from local producers, and specifying that means raised and processed within 250 miles, or that preference will be given to sustainably produced products with a minimum of 30% served meeting sustainable standards. Integrating this language into contracts and RFPs means the commitment is uniformly and routinely communicated, and that all contractors with whom the organization works will work to meet these criteria and be able to track and report on it. And officially integrating it into policies and contracts also provides legal leverage if standards and expectations are not being met. Another best practice for sustainability is providing stakeholders with the information to educate them about the initiative and ensure support within the organization. Educating and engaging leadership in the efforts can strengthen support and knowledge of the initiative, as well as help ensure that resources are allocated appropriately to support this work. If they don't know about it, how can you expect others to, and how can they prioritize these changes? Establishing clear goals, objectives, targets, defining metrics. Again, we talked a lot about that before, and making sure that expectations are clear, and that people will be held accountable for making incremental progress and changes through time, and that the public and leadership expects to hear back about this. To that end, making sure to communicate changes and celebrate success. Often these can be multi-year efforts, and it's important to keep the energy and motivation up. So reporting each year on impacts, celebrating the small changes, having special events to engage consumers and remind them about why these changes are happening are important along the way to defining, reaching long-term goals. And finally, joining a larger movement to stay in tune with the latest best practices and models, new efforts, and to align your changes with a larger network for truly multiplied impact. It also helps helps ensure you'll receive continued support, education, outreach, and communications that help you both stay engaged with the latest and greatest news, and also help you share your story with a broader audience and network. As well as learn about new strategies and approaches. It also means you don't have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to things like defining metrics and even sometimes annual reporting or developing policy language. You can benefit from a lot of the work others are doing, and engaging in these larger networks helps provide you with examples, samples, and starting points to adapt and fit the specific needs of your organization.
Great, thanks. So we want to talk a little bit too about making your pitch to whomever your stakeholders are, whoever you need to. This is something that we've started talking about with a couple of people. We learned this from the Michigan Food and Farming Systems folks, but they have this group development model, and it kind of can be adapted to everything from, an agenda that you sit down with your wellness committee, how to sit down with folks and kind of work through a process that makes sure everyone's engaged, they're there for the right reasons, we're all on the same page, and we kind of know how and what we're working towards and how we're working on it. So a lot of times when we start a new project, we tend to sort of say, okay, this is the stuff that we need to get done. All right, how are we going to do that? Okay, well, we can do X, Y, and Z. Okay, who can take that on? And we may not even think about why, or we may have a general idea, but maybe not everyone at the table, is on board with it or has discussed their commitment to why we're doing whatever we're doing. So this group development model actually tells you to kind of work backwards. So getting really clear about the purpose of the project, finding the right people to bring to the table, who do we have and what are the motivations and assets that they have. And are we missing anybody that should be here? Then once you know who's there and why we're all there, then you can start to talk about how. And that's looking into the systems and infrastructures we already have or what we might need to create. But it also includes, talking about how you want to work together, how you're going to make decisions, that kind of thing. And that's when you then finally get to what are you actually going to accomplish together? But because everyone knows why they're there, what they bring and how we're all going to work together, what we can actually accomplish becomes much more real. So a few other things around pitching this to other folks and thinking through that why. I'm only going to talk about the why part because you will have to figure out the other things when you start projects like this. A lot of institutions, a lot of our audience here today, you're part of an institution or a business or a service that is a community anchor. You are employing and serving and educating a lot of people, a lot of your neighbors. So thinking about local food and promoting healthy food has to do with redefining your commitment to the surrounding community, whatever that is for you, and modeling healthier behaviors to help promote the general health and well-being of your local community. And the other thing to keep in mind is that, in terms of why, is that you're harnessing your purchasing power to sort of increase the availability of local and sustainable foods for everyone. So not just the folks who are coming through your door, you're actually having a larger positive economic impact and increasing the availability of those foods. There are other pieces that might resonate, like increasing transparency in the food system, so that we know what we're getting, and also just telling the story of local farmers and helping people feel more connected to their local food shed, if you will, and to the folks who are feeding them in their surrounding community. So those are just some ways to start thinking about the why, but definitely want to encourage you to consider this group development model, or at least these steps. And one thing I didn't mention was that there's space for feedback and celebration throughout that process. All right, so now we're going to move on to resources. We're going to go through this a little bit quickly so that we can get right into the questions. And so this is where you can find us, the presenters, online. These are some of the things that we're engaged in. And you obviously the links are here, but they're also in the resource index. And so we wanted to just share a few key resources for folks as they do this work. So I'm going to turn it over to, I think Trisha can talk a little bit about Feeding America, and we'll kind of go down the line.
Yeah, so this is Megan. I'll talk a little bit about Feeding America because they do a lot of work with food banks in particular, but they have some good resources for food pantries as well. They have a lot of information about the behavioral economic theories that I was referring to when I spoke about food pantries. They have a great video called Nudges, and it's really about simple changes you can make to encourage your clients or guests to self-select the healthy options.
Great. And then we also have the National Farm to School Network. There's a resource database there that you can search everything from policies to evaluation platforms, just all different kinds of stuff. And they also, all of these groups have some sort of advocacy, maybe except for Let's Move, but you can help, you can find resources and find ways to engage in changing national policy as well as, policies of your specific institution or business. Okay. Oh, and School Food Focus is me too, sorry. So School Food Focus, this is a good example of a larger network that really makes a big difference. They have now just released a project called Focus on the Plate, which the link you can find either at their website or in our index. They're responsible for helping create a new standard around about addressing antibiotic resistance through food purchasing, which is interesting, and we can answer questions about later if you want. But you can find this Focus on the Plate resource, which is over 50 products that are already set up for schools to purchase. They can find them all through the normal school marketplace that are healthier. Maybe they're local, but they might also have some different sustainability criteria. All right, Real Food Challenge.
So Real Food Challenge leverages the power of youth and universities to create a healthy, fair, and green system. And their primary focus is shifting the billions that existing university food budgets away from industrial farms and junk food towards local, community-based, fair, ecologically sound food sources. And on their website, there are a number of different resources, both in terms of getting started at your university, specifically for food service professionals. They have a really great tool equipped with definitions of what meets what standards and provide sort of a spectrum of good, better, best when you're making decisions about food, because sometimes it can be, do I choose healthy versus local, and how do all this work together, as well as a nice calculator platform and tool in terms of tracking and metrics.
Right. And so Megan, Let's Move campaign and the mixing bowl.
Yeah. So Let's Move is Michelle Obama's initiative to move kids to raise a healthier generation. Or, well, yeah, I was trying to read their tagline, which I don't regularly read. So apologies for that. But they have a lot of great resources on their website, from recipes and activities to get kids being more active, recipes for food service. There are a lot more resources as well in the packet that you'll get after the webinar, along with the recording. And What's Cooking has a lot of great connections for food service directors interested in featuring healthy local food. They have a lot of great USDA compliant recipes that it's just a really easily searchable database, which is a fairly new tool that they came out with just about 6 months ago. But it makes it a lot easier to search for institutionals and recipes that have institutional scales. So, at least 50 servings, if not 100, 200, 300. So it works really well for schools.
Great. So, and like Megan said, there are lots of other resources in the handout that we'll send after that kind of, they're organized by category of audience. So you'll be able to see that. We're going to move on to our questions and discussion. And so we want to know if anyone here has any questions. Are you working on something that you'd like to share? Did we highlight some of you in our presentation? You'd like to talk a little bit more about that, or are there other resources that you've used? So you can raise your hand if you'd like to speak. We'll unmute you. Otherwise, you can put your question in the chat box. So we'll give it a minute here. Does anyone have any questions for any of the panelists or about any of the stuff we brought up today? We'll give it a minute. Don't be shy.
We covered it all. There's nothing anyone wants to hear more about? Oh, here we go.
Okay, we've got a raised hand. I think you can just double click.
Yep. I gotta unmute them. So question from Sharon.
I think it's attendees. Sorry, Sharon, 1 second. Down. I think if you just double click. Yeah, there you go. Okay, Sharon, you're on the line.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, good. Because I'm using a new setup here, so I wasn't sure. Okay, so this has been a fantastic webinar, first of all. The discussion is amazing. And I'm somewhat overwhelmed with questions. That's why I couldn't ask anything. So I thought I would tell you about the projects that I have going on. I have two. One is to network our food. I'm in Manistee County, and I'm the coordinator for the Human Services Collaborative. And one of my projects, it will just be starting in September, and it's kind of on a fast track to network the food pantries throughout Manistee County and really increase the accessibility to fresh and healthy food, to improve our whole food environment by connecting our system. And we have a community garden called Jesse's Garden that is grown by volunteers, and it's all done through volunteer work, and it's totally used to supply the food pantries. And so we want to strengthen that system, and then we also want to improve our year-round accessibility, so like the farm to freezer options. And so I'm going to facilitate that process. So I have that going on. And then another thing that I'm the lead volunteer on is a different community garden, Sophia Garden, and that's a raised bed garden that is it's for individuals to rent the plots, and we are reconfiguring that and redesigning it. Some of the beds need to be replaced, and so we want to take the opportunity to really design it to maximize on what we've learned over the past 7 years of having the garden. And so that's another project going on. So I'm real interested in connecting with some food pantry resources. That's why I asked the question that who was the speaker. So I'd like to be able to connect with Megan, and then also I'd like to also find out more of who designed the beds at Father Fred. So but those are the two projects that I have going on, and it's all kind of happening all at the same time.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Um, one thing that comes to mind is when you mentioned the network of food pantries, is the Ottawa Policy Council did something similar, and so maybe we can get you connected with them if you don't already know them.
No, I don't.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, I'll send that to you. And then Meg,
Okay, great.
did you want to say anything about the?
Yeah, well, first off, Sharon, I want to say that those projects you're working on are really great. I'm excited to hear about them. That's always the fun part of doing these webinars. You hear about more projects you didn't even know about. So thank you for the work that you do. And as far as getting in touch with the Father Fred people, I'd be happy to connect you. They have a really great network of volunteers. They actually added to their different segments of their volunteer base that they have. So they have different, I forget if they refer to them as stations or different areas of speciality, but volunteers self-select for which option they want to volunteer within, and they created a new one for the garden. And so far, they've had excess demand for volunteers that want to participate than what they actually need to maintain the garden. So
Okay.
maybe we'll be able to direct some of those to you guys.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, and the one more thing that I wanted to mention is that, Sharon, are you part of the Northwest Food Coalition?
No, I'm not.
So they're a cohort of food pantries throughout a 6-county region up here in Northwest Michigan, and they meet once a month to get together and share best practices and talk about issues that are facing the pantry. So it might be a good group for you to check out, and if you send me an email, I can get you connected with them as well.
Okay. Okay, wonderful. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions or thoughts? Any hands? You can raise your hand in chat. And we aren't getting anything in the chat box, so hopefully we're not missing folks' questions. Anything? Well, I'll just say while we're waiting that our next slide has all of our contact information, and you'll get that. And we are always happy to answer questions, after the webinar. If you're processing, like Sharon mentioned, it is a lot of information, so we totally understand. And we are happy to connect folks to resources after as well.
And a lot of the resources in the handout will be more feed for fodder for that brain. The one we didn't call out in the previous slide was that this is the Building Healthy Community Initiative, comes from the CDC, Centers for Disease Prevention and Control. And before they launched this initiative, they did develop a number of toolkits that kind of walk you through, depending on if you're a pantry, a school, a hospital, an institution, what is step 1, 2, 3, 4, everything from engaging stakeholders to evaluation. And so those toolkits are referenced on the resource sheet.
Yep, and that handout has both the name of the resource, the source, a description, and the link. And you'll get that in your email. So if we don't have any further questions, we can call it quits. A little early today. I'll just ask Tricia and Megan, did you all have any final thoughts you wanted to share with folks? Oh, we might have a question coming in too. Oh, nope, just a thank you. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, if you had any final thoughts.
No, I think that I would just really encourage people to check out the resource handout that you'll get, because it has a lot of great ideas by category, and it'll really help to narrow the focus if you're a little overwhelmed with all the information. It'll give you more information, but it'll really narrow it we tried to really reach a wide audience and variety of institutions here. So I just encourage everybody to check that out.
Great. And I'll add, definitely navigate over to our websites and check out the activities, sign up for our listservs, and we will, be glad to connect you if you reach out to us individually as well. All right. So seeing and hearing no further feedback, we will. Oh, was there something? Oh, yeah, here's our contact information. Yep. We'll leave that up for a minute. Oops, it just has that tricky auto. There we go. So we'll leave that up for a minute, but you'll get this in your email hopefully later this afternoon. So we want to thank everyone sincerely for attending our webinar. Let us know if you have questions, and we look forward to hearing about your projects as well. All of us actually, we should say, have we do blogging and a variety of activities to share stories like this. So please reach out to us. Let us know what you're doing, like Sharon did. Let us know the progress. We would love to highlight your stories, to our networks as well, because it offers folks inspiration to see what other people have made attempts to do.
You could be one of the next examples we share on one of the other webinars.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
And we'd love to hear feedback. We'll send a link with a quick evaluation, just a few questions to know what we did well or how we could improve. So we certainly both appreciate you attending today and taking a few moments to share.
All right. Well, thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.